Hi, I'm Dan Parks with Cruise Tools. We make tools and toolkits for musicians, and I'd like to share with you the basic setup process for a bass. Setup's something that, while it might seem daunting to the uninitiated, there's really not that much to it. It's a well-defined process. You just need a little bit of knowledge and the right tools. And as a bass player, you really can and should be empowered to do your own basic setup, because chances are that setup that you had done at the music store about 6 months ago is probably not valid anymore, and that's because your bass, being principally made of wood, is going to be very subject to changes in temperature, humidity, handling, even changes in string gauges. So once you become a little bit comfortable and familiar with the setup process and get used to playing a well set up bass, you may find that perhaps just before you go on stage for a gig, you pick it up and something seems a little bit wrong. You get out a few tools, do a couple of quick measurements, and you may find that you just need to do a little teeny tiny tweak on the truss rod before you go on stage, and then therefore be able to always play at your best. Now, I should mention that if your bass has some serious problems, if it needs major work, that's the kind of thing that you should leave to a qualified technician. Also, if you're really just uncomfortable using tools or don't really understand the process I described, then it's probably a good idea to leave this to somebody else. Now, what do you need to do in order to do a setup? Well, first of all, you need just a good, clean, well-lit place. Your kitchen table will do fine. You also need some sort of surface to set the bass on so it doesn't get scratched. Now, what I'm using here is an aftermarket setup mat, but you can just as easily use a nice soft bath towel, set a couple books underneath it to set the neck up, and you're good to go. Then you're also going to need some tools. And probably the most common tool you're going to use for a bass is a hex key. These are commonly referred to as Allen keys. I prefer the L-style wrench because you're going to find that depending on the particular operation, one end or the other may actually be more applicable for a given operation. I also like to use a ball end for all the truss rod sizes because a lot of basses, especially the one we're demonstrating on, don't allow direct access of the truss rod, so therefore you have to get it at an angle, and the ball end enables you to do that. Also, if you've got several basses, maybe USA and offshore produced, you're going to need both metric and inch-based Allen key sets. That can add up to a few keys. What we've got here is 8 different keys. In order to help find the right key, what we've done is color-coded gold for metric, black for fractional, and it just helps you get to the correct key a little more quickly. Some other things you're going to need: clearly a screwdriver is an important part of any toolkit. And you're going to need both number 1 and number 2 Phillips tips. If you've got a vintage style bridge, you're going to need a small slotted screwdriver. This is 3 millimeters, which is roughly equivalent to 1/8 inch. On the other end, a large slotted, for certain operations you may or may not need that. Then finally, some makes of basses like Gibson's, a few others, don't actually use an Allen key for truss rod adjustments. They actually have a small nut in there where you need a socket, and therefore a nut driver would do for that. This has a 3/16 inch nut driver on one end for Gibson basses, and then a 1/4 inch on the other. So you're pretty well covered for just about any truss rod. Also, part of a basic technician toolkit is going to be some measuring items. This is an automotive style thickness gauge. And then you also need a good quality steel ruler that's precise. This 6-inch size just works perfect. It's useful if it's got metric and fractional sizes on opposite sides. And then finally, a capo is going to be very useful. I'll explain in a minute why you're going to need that. Now, the process I'm going to describe is virtually the same for all basses, and I'm going to be using throughout the process some specifications, and those are the generally accepted specifications for bass setup. But if your instrument came with a different set of specifications or different conditions to use those, then just simply use those specifications and conditions instead. And then also, this setup I'm going to describe should be considered really a starting point. As you become comfortable with the setup process, you do have a license, a musical license, to play with it a little bit and find out what variations really work best for you as an artist. You may want to try to set the neck as low as you possibly can for very fast action, maybe even putting up with a little bit of buzzing in the lower register, or other changes you might want to make. So just consider this a starting point, and feel free to experiment making just small changes at a time. And if you do find that there's a different setup that works best for you as a musician, be sure to measure what those adjustments are so that you can easily return to that at a later time. Okay, we're going to start the process with the truss rod. We're going to do a quick one-time nut check. Then we're going to go to action, pickup height, and conclude with intonation. For your first setup, give yourself about an hour just so that you don't feel any time pressure, that you can really feel comfortable going through this process. And then you'll find in subsequent setups they'll go much quicker, and certainly if you're doing a little quick tweak before going on stage, that just might take a couple of minutes. So the next section, we're going to go ahead and get started with the truss rod.